We go through, I think we're a little ahead of where we normally are, and I could use a couple of minutes to take care of some clerical things. Your progress reports are due by the end of the period, and I have to add up your homework grades to put them in there so that I have an idea of what your current average is. So let's rock through this stuff. I think we're in pretty good shape. Number one is 3. I think every person in the room got that right. Some of the questions are becoming somewhat repetitive, and that's because, there's only so many Regents questions out there, but we will keep hitting them. The big thing here is that the range is greater in Company 2. You go from 29,000 to 65,000, as opposed to over here, which is only a range of 8,000. Remember, range is highest minus lowest. Which pair is not on the graph? Can somebody tell me how to do that one very easily? Carissa?
Or put the equation into my calculator and look on the table.
That's exactly right. Very good. Well done. Okay, next up. In this particular problem, some people got it wrong. And I'd like you to check this out because I've mentioned this a number of times this year, and I don't know if you're just not hearing me. I don't know if it was a careless mistake, and I don't know if you are hearing me but just aren't doing it because you're just going to do what you're going to do. Whatever the case, the only thing I can offer you is years of wisdom. And it's not like I'm brilliant. It's just that I've graded probably 150,000 math papers over the years. And after a while, even an idiot like me notices patterns in what kids get right and what kids get wrong. Now, this is a problem where, right in here it says the profit of x, P of x, is the revenue minus the cost, R of x minus C of x. So it says over here, R of x is this trinomial. So I rewrite the trinomial. And then I have to subtract, there's the minus, the cost of x, the C of x. So there's the cost. And you have to make sure that's in parentheses. Now, here's the step that of all things all kids do, this step is the critical step toward getting the question right or getting the question wrong. The critical step is to change every sign in this package because you are subtracting the whole thing. Now, you can do change every sign, or you could do it as I like to do it. This is not the important part. Just distribute the -1, because this is a -1 in front of the package. Distribute it, -300x minus 250. The important part is that you realize that you have to subtract the entire package, the whole thing. The mistake I see kids make is when they do it in their head and they don't take the time to write this line out, this middle line. If you take the time to write that middle line out, there is a 95% chance or better you will get it right. If you don't write the line out, it's probably slightly better than 50-50. Now, you do with that advice what you want. I'm not saying one way is necessarily a mathematically better way. They both work. The thing is, when you do it in your head and you don't take the time to write out the step, students make mistakes. Now, if I was doing my homework, I might do it in my head just to get it done. I would never on a test do it in my head because you're far more likely to get it wrong. So make sure you write out the step and then you take the next step by combining like terms. It's choice 2. And this guy here, I saw a couple of people put 0.7. Spencer?
Yep.
0.7, buddy, is up here.
Yeah, I know. I like as soon as I handed it in, I realized that I got it wrong.
All right, so this is 7.0 right over here. You want a point in the double shaded area. You must be very leery of where these 2 points cross because this is a broken line. The broken line is not in the solution set. It's like an open circle on a number line. You get really, really close to it, but you can never quite touch it.
Could you answer with number 4 as well?
-3, +5's up here. You have them reversed. You're thinking it's 5, -3. -3, 5. You do the x first. See the x? -3, 5 up here.
It's been a very long time.
Yes. So obviously we don't want to screw that up come test time. So let's not make that mistake again. Any other questions? All right, last night's homework. Let's get it out, and we'll start going through all these answers. Some of the questions are somewhat repetitive. By the way, I have your take-home test to hand back to you. I will give it to you afterwards. This question was on your take-home test. So this way we get to go over it. 2 ways to come up with the equation. The first way is to recognize that it's exponential, and you put the initial value, which is 120, times the common ratio, which is 1.5, always to the x minus 1. Or you can put it in your calculator and do an exponential regression. If you do that, it'll tell you 80 times 1.5 to the x. They are equal. It's the same exact value. They both work, etc. Okay? God bless. On the test and on virtually every person got this number right. Here's the problem. You guys had a really hard time with this question on the test. Would it be reasonable to use this model? No way. If you plug in a 52 here, you're like way past the trillions. You're in the quadrillions and quintillions and massive numbers. Spencer, take the box. There's nowhere near that many people on planet Earth. Nobody's going to buy hundreds of thousands of apps of the same app, so no, it's not a reasonable amount. Okay, here's number 2, or page 2 of the homework. Take a look. If you have any questions, ask them. Any questions on this page? We good? I can move on? It is so incredibly important that you ask questions if you do not understand. Also, I want to remind you of the importance of having that separate notebook. Okay? This question is a good step function question. Remember we did those last week? We spent a little while talking about them. If you notice here, every time he hits an odd birthday, he has to move up a division. So he stays in the division here. Then he hits his 7th birthday and he has to jump up on that birthday. So on the 7th birthday, he's not allowed to stay in this old division. He has to jump up a division. And because he becomes included in the next division, we fill that dot in. It stays open here because he's not allowed to be in it. Open means you get really, really close, but you can't exactly be that day. Can I move on? You could also solve number 6. I just did it on a calculator by looking for the roots. These reasonable domain questions are ones that we've had trouble with during the course of the year. In this particular problem, it's a ball being thrown, so you can't have the ball in the air for negative amounts of time. All real numbers includes negatives. The first choice has negatives. And I have never seen anybody who could throw a ball in the air for 144 seconds. That would be greater than 2 minutes. That's a really long time for a ball to be in the air. So the only reasonable, keyword there, reasonable domain is from 0 to 3. Okay? As far as it says justify your answer, g of x has the greatest because I plugged it in the calculator. I went to the maximum. The maximum height was 11. 11 is greater than 6, so therefore g of x has a greater maximum. Questions? Preguntas? Okay. One of these we did yesterday. Actually, 2 of them we did yesterday. God bless. So very important when you do this to realize, I didn't underline this, but I should have. Determine the smallest integer. Yes, if you solve it, you get x is greater than -1. But -1 is not the answer. It's an inequality. It specifically says x is greater than -1. What's the smallest integer that's greater or bigger than -1? 0. So 0 is the correct answer to this. If I said to you x is greater than 7, what's the smallest integer greater than 7? Hey, what's the smallest integer greater than 7?
8.
8. If I said the solution is the smallest integer less than 7, what would that be?
Negative infinity.
Oh, the greatest integer less than 7, sorry.
6.
6, okay? Extremely important that you interpret what they're asking for on these equations, or inequalities, more to the point, okay? We did this one slightly different yesterday, and I wanted to show you I could do it either way. I could call this W and this 2W, or I could call this L and 1/2 L. They work out to the same answer either way. Okay, because the width is half the length, so I got to, I should say 8.2 divided by 2, not divided by 4. I don't know why I wrote a 4 there. But 4.1 is the correct answer. Okay? Interesting here, again, it's so important to underline key words. What's the value of x, or value of a, I'm sorry. And I look at the equation, a is whatever's in the parenthesis minus whatever, it says x minus a in that parenthesis. So I start doing completing the square, and I notice I get a 6 there. I could stop, I don't need to keep going. I've identified what goes in there. They're basically checking to see if you know that it's the half of the negative 12. So it says x minus and x minus. So don't put down a negative 6. The minus is in both parts of the formulas. It's just what goes in place of the a, and in this case, it's a positive 6. Yes?
So if you can, like, for number 12 or 29, can you, like solve by completing the square, and then you see that you get negative 5 as the square root, and the square root of negative 5.
Oh, for this bottom one?
Yeah.
Yeah. First off, any questions before the bottom one? All right. So I did it by graphing it, and I noticed it never touched the axis. Because it never touched the axis, there's no real roots, because the roots are wherever, or the zeros are wherever it crosses the axis. Agree? Okay, so since it doesn't, they're on none. AJ, he looks at it differently, and he says, well, let me do completing the square here. Or maybe you said, hey, I could try quadratic formula. And when you do it, you get a negative under the radical. Well, there are no real answers if you get negatives under the radical. That's imaginary answers, and those come into play in 2 more years. We don't do those in this course. Okay? Questions? All right. More to look at. Now, everything we've been doing so far is all about functions and equations, and those are the 2 most tested topics on the entire test. After this one, on the top, we start sliding into semi-super topics. Not exactly as important individually, but collectively, they still add up to a ton of points on your test. Okay? And graphing would be one of those, so God bless. I put a whole bunch of graphing questions. That first question we did the other day. All right, take a look. Any questions? Remember, for a y-intercept, what are the x values? Hey, on a y-intercept, what's the x value? Hey!
0.
0. On an x-intercept, what's the y value?
0.
0. Whenever you're doing the intercept, the other guy is 0. Say it with me. Whenever you're doing an intercept, the other guy is 0. Very good. So I just plug in a 0 for the other guy here. And I get 4x is 40, x is 10. Any questions here? All right. Scan 7. All right. Now we're starting to get into graphs. And very important point here. When you do graphs, when you walk into, notice what I wrote on the top here. I want to talk about partial credit. Kids on the Regents exam, the only kids who get shockingly disappointing grades, or, again, I've never had anybody fail the Regents, but who might fail the Regents. The way you get your answer key is there's a front page, which is a Scantron, and you bubble it all in. And then on the back side, there's another section to be bubbled in. But it's bubbles that we fill in as the teachers. And we bubble how many points you get on each question for the part 2, 3, 4. Guys like this, where you have to do the writing. There's no multiple choice. The only way a kid fails this Regents exam is if almost all of the questions come out with zeros on the back, where we bubble it in. If you're getting a point out of 2, 2 out of 3, and at this level with you guys, you should be getting lots of questions where you get full credit. If that happens, you're not going to fail a Regents exam. There is no way on God's green earth. I mean, realistically, on the part one, I think there's 27 questions. If you shut your eyes and go eeny, meeny, mo, you're gonna get at least 7 of them right. And that right there is 14 points, and you only need 27 points on the test to pass. So I'm not worried about that. The only way you're gonna fail is if you get zeros on parts 2, 3, and 4. So what you need to do every single time that you do a part 2, 3, 4 question is you need to make sure you show lots of work. Because by showing lots of work, we can get you some partial credit. And you need to make sure you identify things you can do. Sometimes, Kaylee, kids look at the question and they go, oh, I don't know how to get that whole question right. And they kind of give up on it. And then they end up getting a 0 for that question. Don't think like that. Pick the question apart and say, well, what part of this question do I know how to do? What can I do? Let me get a point for this. Let me get a point for that. So here's a really good example of that, okay? First off, maybe you forgot how to get to absolute value on your calculator. It's math, then number, then absolute value. Next, show the table every time you're gonna do a graph. The reason is because if in desperation, we think you're gonna get a 64, maybe we look at this and we say, hey, they show the table, they plotted the points. Remember how Spencer just screwed up a minute ago because he was reversing his X's and Y's? If you put your table down, if we did Spencer's graph, his way with what he was just doing, he's gonna go sideways. And if he doesn't have his table written down, as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't deserve any points.
Yep.
But if you wrote your table down and you graph what your table says, we can get you 1 point for showing all of his correct work. That's the importance of the table. If you never write the table down, how do we know you know how to graph if your graph is wrong? Now, if your graph is fully right, that's a different story. But you want to maximize partial credit. And when you take the Regents, you have to be there at least 2 hours. You can be there up to 3 hours. So there's plenty of time. But let's say, for whatever reason, you forgot how to do an absolute value graph. You forgot to do math number. That's the kind of thing kids will forget every now and then. Shouldn't happen on the Regents, but let's say it does. And you look at these questions, I think you can say to yourself, hey, wait a minute. This is that -2, and it's not in the parentheses, so that's vertical shift. So whatever this graph is, I don't know what it is, but I know that -2 is vertical shift, and it moves everything down 2 units. So even if you had no points for the graph above, you would get 1 point for this one here. And then here, the 4 is included in the parentheses. That's not vertical shift. What is that? Horizontal shift. And remember, it's reversed in the parentheses, so I'm going to go right 4 units. So always find in every single question something you can do. And when you find that something that you can do, work it. Because if you don't get zeros on the back, you will guaranteed pass. Now, I'm looking at trying to get tons of you guys to get 85 and higher. What we want to do there is get questions fully right. So you want to be able to get them all right, not just get enough to pass. Okay. Next graph up. Here are the 2 graphs done. You'll notice I didn't put a table for the line because I used y equals mx plus b. I should have written m equals and b equals. I should have. I didn't do that. But the y-intercept's -4 up 2 over 1. And then I put the table down for the parabola. And the next part, I remember grading this question. And what a lot of kids did for the last part, let's read specifically what it says. It says, using this graph, determine and state all values of x. And a lot of kids just wrote down the coordinates of the points of intersection. It doesn't say to do that. It says write the values of x. So all I'm looking for are the x values. The x value here is -2. I don't care that the y value is -8. That's irrelevant to me. And over here, the x value is 1. So the answer is -2 and 1. Do not list both points. Now, they usually ask you to, but this time they did not. Okay? For the first question, I just used the calculator. I put the 2 functions in there. And I looked for the first month where B was greater. That was the 7th month. And as far as number 20 goes, I have to graph them. I looked for the first graph, a solid line shaded below. For the second one, a solid line shaded above, and that was choice 3. Okay? Any questions? Again, we've started to see some of these already. The key is with the first one, it's the point of intersection. That's very important because that means it solves both equations. If it's not on both, it's not a solution. It has to solve both. On that last question, it's defined recursively. So the first one, for the 0th term, they tell you it's 2. And then you're going to do the new term equals -2 times the previous term plus 3. So I plug in a 2. -2 times 2 is -1. I'm sorry, -4 plus 3 is -1. Then for the next one, I plug in the -1. -2 times -1 is 2 plus 3 is 5. And that's the correct answer. Okay? Questions? And last but not least, this is rational here because the square root of 4 is 2 and the square root of 9 is 3. The other ones cannot be broken down. They're all irrational. And again, reasonable domain. Very important to understand that you can't have negative household appliances. Okay? Based on number of people. So you can't have negative people in the house, I'm sorry. Integers can include negatives. Those are -5, -4, +7, 22, things like that. Irrationals, God bless, are square roots we can't figure out. We don't get those parts of people. Rational numbers are fractions. No matter how much you might like to cut someone in half, you cannot have a half a person or a quarter person or a third of a person. So the only reasonable domain is whole numbers. Okay, any questions? All right, so now, what I would suggest that you do